Hello, students. Welcome to the class on Trees by Joyce Kilmer. Alfred Joyce Kilmer was born in 1886 and he died very young at the age of 31 in 1918. He was an American writer and poet, a journalist, literary critic, editor, and a lecturer. His work celebrated the common beauty of the natural world as well as his Roman Catholic religious faith. He participated in the First World War and was killed by being shot at the Second Battle of the Marne in 1918 at the age of 31. Several critics dismissed Kilmer's work as being too simple and too sentimental, and they suggested that his style was far too traditional, even archaic. Moving on to the poem Trees. Trees was published in 1913 and it's a short poem with two-lined stanzas, with six two-line stanzas. Let's read the poem and then move into the understanding of the poem. Trees. I think that I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast, a tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms to pray, a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair, upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with rain. Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. Let's try to understand the poem. Here we understand that the speaker uses the first person pronoun I, and the speaker is a poet. If you look at the last stanza, it is said poems are made by fools like me. So the I, the persona, the speaker of the poem is a poet. So this poet says that he has never seen something which is as beautiful. He has never seen or read a poem which is as beautiful and perfect as a tree. He then moves on to talk about the tree's connectedness with nature, God, and um, the living beings around the tree. So, in the second stanza, the poet says, a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast. So, here the poet tries to picturize or present to us in an image of a thirsty tree which drinks from the Mother Earth. The way the tree drinks from the earth is like a baby drinking milk from its mother's breast. So this tree, when it is thirsty, it presses its roots into the tree, into the earth, into the Mother Earth, and gets its nourishment from the earth. The earth is presented as a mother here. Moving on. A tree that looks at God all day and lifts her leafy arms to pray. Which talks here in the stanza, the poet talks about the tree's connectedness to God. Looking at the leafy branches of the tree which faces heaven, the poet feels that the tree keeps on looking at God all day long and it just keeps on praying, praising God for the wonderful creation. A tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins in her hair. Now, this is a reference to the tree's connectedness with the living beings around it. So, in summer, it becomes home to robins. Robins build their nest on the leaves of the tree, on the branches of the tree, and they look like crowns on top of the tree. Upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with rain. Here again, the poet tries to emphasize the tree's connectedness with nature. The tree shares an intimate relationship with snow and rain. Finally, as he concludes the poem, he says, Poems are made by fools like me, but only God can make a tree. So he says, he talks about the, human beings' insufficiency in creating something as perfect and beautiful as a tree. He says that poems or art can be made by humans, can be made by fools, but for a tree to be created, only God can do that. Moving on to the context of the poem, Trees was published in 1913 in an early issue of the Poetry magazine, and it was subsequently included in Joyce Kilmer's 1914 collection, Trees and Other Poems. This poem was published in an era when the society faced a lot of changes. It was an era of mass production and industrialization. So the poem Trees represents a naive longing of the poet to return to a natural Eden like paradise. Having lived in an era of industrialization, having witnessed the damage industrialization has brought on the nature, the poet uh, tries to inject this idea that nature can't be easily created, just like the creation of human beings. The poem, the trees itself becomes a symbol of God's divine creation, and the poem becomes a symbol of human creation. We see that the poet exhibits traits of romantic and Victorian poetry because the poem deals with nature and the way nature has an impact on people. We see the romantic traits in this poem. Kilmer himself has acknowledged of the influence of a Victorian poet, Coventry Patmore, in his poems. This poem can be looked at as a mix of nature poetry and religious poetry. And in this poem, Kilmer praises nature in order to celebrate God, in order to see the evidence of a divine hand in nature's glory. Looking at the form of the poem, the poem is set in two lined stanzas. We call these two lined stanzas as couplets. Let's go back to the poem. We see two lined stanzas. I think I shall never see a poem lovely as a tree. The second stanza is again a couplet of two lines. Third stanza is again a couplet of two lines. So overall, the poem is a set of six couplets put together. We also see that it's a simple language that is used, and there is a rhyme scheme that is used by the poet. Each of the couplets, the ending words of each of the couplets rhyme. We have sea rhyming with tree. We have pressed rhyming with breast. We have day rhyming with pray. Similarly, wear rhyming with hair. Lane rhyming with rain. Me rhyming with tree. So we can trace the rhyming scheme as A, B, B, C, C, D, D, E, E, A, A. So that is the form of the poem. As we already said, the speaker in Trees is a poet and a religious believer. And he takes unusual step of stressing the failure of his own craft. He says poems can be made by fools like me. There is a suggestion, or there is the poet is trying to suggest that he is incapable of producing something as divine as a tree. We see that his religion, Catholic religion, has also had a great impact in his own view of the world. One of the major themes that is dealt with in the poem is a contrast between the human art and the divine creation. Trees is a hymn of praise to God's creation, celebrating both the wonder of the natural world and its maker. The speaker talks about the poetry's inability to capture the true beauty of nature. He says that no poem can be lovely as a tree. He also says that the trees are so wonderfully created, they become an essential part of a peaceful, harmonious natural world. Remember, we saw how the tree is connected to the nature, connected to the elements of nature. We also see how the tree is connected to God and the other living beings around it. So there is this interconnectedness with the parts of nature. And the tree becomes representative of a perfectly balanced natural ecosystem. And towards the end of the poem, the poet acknowledges his own insufficiency, the insufficiency of human art when compared to a divine creation. So, that is one of the major themes that we find in the poem. Two major symbols in the poem are the snow and the rain. They symbolize the purity and nourishment provided by God. In the poem, it is said, "Upon whose bosom snow has lain, who intimately lives with rain." Now, in the Bible, there is an association of snow with spiritual cleanliness, especially in the passages of Isaiah 1:18, where it is said that the Lord cleanses people's sins and turn them white as snow. Similarly, rain also is essential for life on earth to survive. It also signifies the coming of harvest, which in turn represents growth and nourishment. Coming to the final section of this lecture, we will be looking at the literary devices that I used. First of all, there are alliterations, assonance, and consonants. Now, what is alliteration? Alliteration refers to the repetitive use of a consonant at the beginning of the word. For example, if we look at the first line, I think that. So, think and that are examples of alliteration. Similarly, um, we have examples of assonance here. Assonance is where we find uh, a vowel sound being repeated in a single line. Look at this line. Upon whose bosom. We have two oo sounds being repeated here. Similarly, in the next line, intimately lives with rain. So we have e sound, intimately lives with rain. We have the e sound being repeated here. Similarly, we also have consonants. Consonants is the presence of consonant sound anywhere in the word. So we have examples of alliteration, assonance, and consonants in the poem. The second literary device is enjambment. Enjambment is defined as a clause that does not come to an end at a line break. Instead, it moves over the next line. Remember, when we talked about the form of the poem trees, we said that it is arranged in couplets. But the couplets form a single sentence. The two lines in the couplet are connected. We make sense of the entire couplet by reading through the next line. That is, I think that I shall never see. There is not an end there. Never see a poem lovely as a tree. So it is enjambed. The two lines are connected. Similarly, in the next line, a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast. So the sentence does not end in the first line itself, but it runs on to the second. So that is the example for enjambment. Another literary device is juxtaposition between poetry and trees, between human art and divine creation. We see that there is a comparison between the poem and the tree. Even in the last stanza, we see a comparison between the poem and the tree. The poem and the tree are placed at the same level to make sense of an idea that the poet tries to elaborate on. Another important literary device is personification. We see that the speaker personifies the tree as offering up its arms towards heaven in prayer. Personification basically means uh, you give human attributes to a non living object or non living thing. So, here in this poem, we find that the tree is personified. Tree is given a lot of human attributes. In the second stanza, it is said that the tree's hungry mouth is pressed against the earth's sweet flowing breast. So the tree is presented as having a mouth. Similarly, lifts her leafy arms to pray. Again, another human attribute that is given to the tree. Similarly, we have the nest of robins in her hair, another human attribute. So we find that the tree is personified in this poem. Another literary device is imagery. We find that the author uses very clear images, which involves us all the five senses to make the idea of the beauty and wonder of the divine creation clear to us. So we have a tree when it is personified as having hungry mouth. That brings us an image that brings an image into our mind. A nest of robins in her hair, lifts her leafy arms to pray. These are all examples of images that the poet has created and which actually makes an imprint in the mind of the reader. Another literary device is simile. We know that simile is a comparison between an object or a person with something else to make the meaning clear to the reader. And similes always use the words like as and like. So, in the first stanza, we see a poem lovely as a tree. There is a comparison between poem and tree. The comparison is made using the word as. Similarly, poems are made by fools like me. Fools like me. Now, here the poet compares himself with a fool. So, that is simile. The last literary device that we'll be talking about is anaphora. Anaphora is the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of multiple lines, usually in succession. If you look at the second, third, and the fourth stanzas, we find that they all start in the same way. The second stanza starts with the word a tree whose hungry mouth is pressed. The third stanza again starts with a tree that looks at God all day. Fourth stanza, a tree that may in summer wear a nest of robins. So this kind of repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of multiple lines is what we call anaphora. So basically, we looked at the author today. We talked about Joyce Kilmer. We tried to understand the poem Trees. We also looked at the form, the poet persona, the theme, symbols, and the literary devices used in the poems. Thank you so much.